Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Mead Made, and today I am going to show you how you can take a clear resin 3D print and make it look like glass. So let's go ahead and jump in the video. Alright, so now it's time to get these wings crystal clear. And this is going to be a bit of a process, but in the end it is definitely going to be worth it. So all I'm going to do is take these. I've got my contact paper down in my spray booth because I want proper ventilation. And what I'm going to do is set these aside and let's go over everything you really need. So first off, as always, Mr. Safety, you need a respirator, and make sure you have a proper respirator that is, has enough of the micron filtration to be able to not allow the dust to get in. So that. I'm going to have some paper towels, obviously, just for cleanup. I'm going to be using gloves when sanding. When I'm doing dry sanding, I don't usually wear gloves. It's not a bad idea to wear gloves all the time, but I'm going to be doing wet sanding. So wet sanding, I absolutely want to have gloves on, because if you have a cut, you can get that resin in your fingers and that wet resin, and it could be just a bad thing. So wear gloves. I'm going to be doing wet sanding. So I've got this little spray bottle full of water, and I'm just going to keep everything wet. And the nice thing about wet sanding is it does minimize the amount of dust in the air. Now, the sandpapers. I have a lot of sandpaper I'm going to be going through. A whole lot of sandpaper. So here's all the sandpapers I'm going to be using in order. So first, 400 grit. Then I'm going to go to a 600 grit. Then an 800 grit. Then a 1000 grit. Then a 1500 grit, then 2000 grit, then 2500 grit, a 3000 grit, and lastly, a 5000 grit. And this 5000 grit, it has the texture of just like a regular piece of paper. Like, there is no grit, it feels, whatsoever. But this is really going to help polish it and get it crystal clear. So that's the order I'm going to be going in. So I'm going to turn on my ventilation booth and get my mask on and get started. So when you're wet sanding, the first thing you want to do is just kind of spray down your model and get it wet. And once you have it nice and wet, then you can just take your sandpaper and start sanding it like you normally would with any other type of model you would be sanding. The only difference is you definitely want to keep the model wet while sanding. This also minimizes the dust, like I said earlier. The thing to look at is when you start getting too much of that, residue from you sanding off, you sometimes have to spray it again and kind of clean it off and then keep sanding again. Then once you finish sanding your model completely with that sandpaper, the last step you're going to do is go ahead and spray off your model and clean it, because you want it perfectly clean before you start the next level of sandpaper. So here you can see this is what it looks like after the first round, and it is foggy and nowhere near being clear. And this is also a good opportunity to see what you've sanded and if there's any areas that it just feels like you missed, and you can go back over it, kind of like what I did right here. And then, just like I said, when you're done, you got to clean it again, wipe it down really good, check it, then you're ready to start the next level of sandpaper. So then I tear off a little square and I'm ready for the 600 grit sandpaper. And then we just do the exact same thing we just did. Going to spray it down and then just start sanding. So this is what it looks like after the 600 grit, and it's still looking really foggy. But no matter, we just press on and move on to the 800 grit. Then we're going to spray down our model and start sanding again. And if you haven't noticed yet, there's a little bit of a repetition in this. Every single time we're going to just spray it, sand it, clean it. And we just keep doing that until we end on 5,000. And here's what they look like after 800. And they're just looking soft, kind of a soft fog. But like I said before, we're just going to keep moving up. Now it's time for 1,000 grit sandpaper. And here's what they look like after 1,000 grit sandpaper. And honestly, it's a little discouraging at this point because you're like, it's never going to get clear. But we move on to the 1,500 grit sandpaper. One thing I will note, at this point, it's a good idea to keep your area clean. I have to keep wiping down my contact paper that I'm protecting my table with and getting rid of any of that residue that might be there because I don't want to keep rubbing the same stuff into it. I want the sandpaper to do the sanding. I don't want to be sanding the residue into the model. And here we are at the 1,500 grit sandpaper and what they're looking like. And still pretty foggy, but a light foggy. And now we're moving on to 2,000 grit. The one good thing, once you start hitting this stage, then you start seeing, while it's wet and you're sanding, your hand showing through on the other side. Which, after all the work you've already done, it does feel good to see that. But then they dry and they look all nice and cloudy. So we're not there yet. We're going to keep pushing on and move on to the 2,500 grit sandpaper. Then they start looking clearer and clearer. And then the more you sand it, then you start to actually see your hand through it. And just to prove it here, while it's wet, you can see your hand right through there. I was so happy to see this. But then you dry it and it fogs up again. Now we move on to the 3,000 grit sandpaper. So a fun thing happens when you're at this stage of the process. You realize your arms are going to fall off and you're never going to finish this project without any arms because you've been sanding for over an hour. Now we're to the last stage, and this is the most important, where you want to make sure you have got everything nice and clean because you do not want to have any leftover residue on your model or around your model. So I wipe down my contact paper really well. And now the last stage of sanding. We're going to sand with 5,000 grit sandpaper. Now you can see when they're wet, they are really clear and they look great. But when they dry, they're just a little bit foggy. All right, real quick, I just gotta say thank you. Thank you to all of these amazing people for supporting me on Patreon this month. And if you become a supporter on my Patreon, you will get exclusive access to all of my private Discord channels where we talk about 3D printing, painting 3D prints, showing off some awesome finished works of art, and just helping each other when we're having some issues, whether that be printing or even painting. But you'll also get access to all of my behind-the-scenes content, my Patreon exclusive tutorials, as well as being able to vote on some of the videos that I make every month. So if you're interested in joining this awesome community, I'll go ahead and put a link below for you. So let's go ahead and get back to this video. Okay, so here they are. And you can see that it is pretty clear, but it's not crystal clear. And this is the one thing that I'm going to be doing. My last step, now that I've sanded through all of these different grits, I'm going to be using this gloss clear top coat. And I'm going to be just doing it all over this entire thing. So I'm going to be giving it an entire coat of this with my airbrush, and then it's going to really start to be very translucent. So I'm going to go ahead, clean up this whole mess here, and then get started with this. The one thing I will say about this is it is already thinned down, and you just got to put it in your airbrush. It's actually really nice. Also, don't put it in the back of your spray booth and let all the overspray get all over your bottle of clear coat. So once I'm ready and I've got the wings on clips so I can hold them easily, I get my respirator on and start airbrushing this clear coat. It's great because I'm pouring it directly into my airbrush, not having to dilute it in any way, and just give it a nice even coat all over it. And it took a couple coats. And the one thing is when you're airbrushing this, it does make it look like it's kind of got like a milky clear to it. But don't worry about that because it will dry 100% clear. And here you can see a side-by-side of the wet clear coat versus the unsprayed wings. Do the exact same thing to the other wings, and then that's pretty much it. Okay, so the clear coat is done. We've done all of our sanding. And here, just to show you how clear we got this. You can see straight through it. We got this looking like glass. And you can see the other one. It's to the point where you can see a little, like there's some bubbles right here actually in the print, and it showed through, but this looks amazing. And this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted them like super transparent, and I wanted them looking like they're clear glass almost. So one thing about this entire project, now if you noticed, this was flat surfaces. This process works best when you're doing a flat surface because it's just like sanding any other print. If you have a lot of details and you start really sanding in on there, you're going to lose those details. So you really have to be selective of how you use this process. Now, one thing you can do, bonus tip for those of you that stuck around, you can actually just wash your clear resin print and then just spray a clear coat over it, and that will even help you get a clear looking resin 3D print. But it will not look crystal clear like glass like our wings turned out. But it will help you for sure. Thanks a lot for sticking around. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will go ahead and see you guys in that next video.